In this video, we're going to be going over how to quickly screen or assess your ankles for plantar flexion, as well as how to stretch in plantar flexion in combination with inversion and eversion. So for the screen or the assessment, it's a very simple setup. All you have to do is stay seated on the ground. You can grab a seat, keep your hands to your side, hands to your sides for support, or you can lean back on something. All you're going to do is keeping your knees together or your knees in line with your shoulders and your feet shoulder width apart. You're just going to slide your feet out until you can no longer maintain flat contact with the ground. And the reason we're doing this is the further you go out, the more plantar flexion I'm required to have in order to keep my foot flat on the floor. You'll notice I'm actually a very good example of what it looks like when you don't have much range of motion, along with when there's an asymmetry present. So I have more plantar flexion on my left side than I do on my right. So right around here is where you can start to see the difference. If I were to completely relax, you can see the difference in how close my left foot is compared to my right on the floor. And if I really tried to actively reach down to the floor, I can achieve that on my left side, but I can't on my right side. So I know that I have to work more on plantar flexion with my right ankle than I do my left, although my left is missing just as much because I should be able to go a little bit further out. So this is a very easy screen or assessment to take a look at if there's any asymmetries present or if you're just missing gross plantar flexion. Now, in order to stretch plantar flexion, we're going to be working with a very popular stretch, very easy to use stretch, and that's just a very simple heel sit. Now, the thing about the heel sit, when it's typically taught, you usually go knees together, feet together, and then you sit back. This is a great option. The thing is, it primarily biases plantar flexion and inversion, which is fine, right? So if you think about it, plantar flexion and inversion helps to really bias the tissues on the outside. It's just as important to be able to bias plantar flexion and eversion and the tissues on the inside, because when you do a controlled articular rotation or an ankle car, you'll notice that as I'm in the zone of plantar flexion, I transition from plantar flexion and inversion into plantar flexion and eversion, right? So being able to stretch both is going to help you address some of the range of motion deficits within that car and help you improve some of your active range of motion when you start to train that. So first we're going to be talking about how to maximize plantar flexion inversion. Knees go together. Very important, your toes need to go together too, your big toe. If your big toes together, your heels can actually separate. And then you can sit back, and the more you sit back, the more stretch you get in your ankle. So I'll do it from this back view. You can see if my feet or knees are together and my toes are together, I can separate my heels and then sit back as if I'm trying to keep my butt between my heels. And the more I sit back, the more stretch I'll feel. I can lean to one side, and that's going to help bias the one ankle that I'm leaning on. I can lean to the other, or I can lean straight back. So that's how you bias plantar flexion and inversion. Now for plantar flexion and eversion, it's going to be a little bit tougher because you don't have as much range of motion. It's going to be more uncomfortable as well. So you do want to be conscious of your positioning here and know that or expect it to be uncomfortable so that you don't try and push through anything that you're not ready for. And so the setup for this is you're going to, instead of bringing your knees together, your knees are going to go apart. And instead of keeping your big toes together, you're going to just slightly separate them. And then from here, instead of trying to point my heels away from each other, I'm going to try and point my heels in towards each other. And as I sit back, I'm going to use my hands for support, and I'm going to try and put my body weight. And you'll notice that the more you bring your heels towards each other, the more plantar flexion and eversion you're putting your ankle in. And this might put a lot of pressure on the top of the big toe or on the dorsal aspect of your foot or your first big toe joint. And the reason is because that's where you're putting the pressure as you sit back. So you may want to put something soft under there or just simply use your hands for support. Now, the more you sit back, the more you're going to want to make sure you keep your heels towards each other. And the way you can do that is you can actually take your hands and push the heels towards each other as you sit back. And that's how you set up to improve your plantar flexion and eversion. Like I said, that's not going to be one that you're going to be able to hold for as much time as you would with the plantar flexion inversion, but also just depends on your flexibility. As with everything else, once you do the stretches, come back into your screen or your assessment and just see if there's any change there. And I can already bring my feet just a little bit further. I even balanced out a little bit here. And so it's something that you can do daily. And if it's something that you're really limited in, make sure you focus on one versus the other. That way you can start to clean up and come back to your cars and start to address those deficits in that active range of motion. And that's how you do a quick plantar flexion ankle screen and or assessment, and how to bias inversion and eversion in the heel sit stretch.